It was supposed to be a routine day in court. A small civil dispute, parking violation, nothing more. I sat quietly on the back bench, dressed in civilian clothes. Nobody paid me much attention. And I preferred it that way. I had seen enough attention in my life, 12 years in the Navy, 10 of them as a SEAL. The courtroom buzzed with casual conversation, lawyers flipping through folders, the occasional clang of metal as an officer adjusted their belt. Then came Officer Gerald Brenner. He walked in like he owned the place, broad shoulders, buzz cut, and an attitude that could stain the floor. He didn't know who I was. To him, I was just another guy waiting for his turn. "You look lost," Officer Brenner said loudly, eyeing me like I didn't belong. "This isn't the VA, buddy. You here for traffic court, or are you just hoping someone holds your hand through it?" A few people chuckled. I didn't move. I stared at the seal on the wall behind the judge's bench and said nothing. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. But his voice kept coming. "What's the matter, cat got your tongue? Or are you one of those silent warrior types I keep hearing about on Facebook?" More laughter. My hands tightened on the folder in my lap, my service records, citations, letters of commendation. I had brought them for a completely different reason. I never expected I'd be using them in a different kind of battle. The bailiff told him to quiet down. But Officer Brenner just smirked. "People like that shouldn't get special treatment," he said, motioning toward me. "Just because someone wore a uniform once doesn't mean they're above the law." He didn't know who I was. But he was about to find out. The courtroom settled into an uneasy silence. A few heads turned toward me, expecting some sort of reaction. I gave them nothing. Years of training had taught me how to control my breathing, my voice, even my expression. I wasn't here to grandstand. But I also wasn't going to be disrespected. "Mr. Walker," the clerk called. I stood up. The judge had arrived, a sharp woman in her 50s with a commanding presence. Judge Ellen Monroe. Fair, strict, and known for not tolerating nonsense in her courtroom. I approached the stand calmly. "What's this about again?" she asked, scanning the paperwork. "Disputed citation," my attorney replied. "Parking violation on federal grounds. My client believes it was issued improperly, and we have documentation." Before she could finish, Officer Brenner stepped forward again. "Your Honor, I issued that citation. This man was parked in a restricted zone and refused to comply when asked to move." Judge Monroe looked up from the file. "And who exactly refused, officer?" Brenner pointed toward me with that same smirk. "That guy right there." The judge paused. Then her eyes scanned the folder I had handed to the court clerk earlier. She opened it. Silence hung thick as she read. Her brows raised. "Officer Brenner," she said carefully, "are you aware of who this man is?" "Doesn't matter to me," he shrugged. "Rules are rules." The judge closed the folder slowly. "It should matter." She turned to the courtroom. "This man is Lieutenant Commander Noah Walker. Retired Navy SEAL. Served 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. Recipient of the Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, and the Navy Cross." The room shifted. A murmur. Even the bailiff's eyes widened. But Brenner didn't flinch. "That doesn't change the fact," she cut him off. "It changes everything," Judge Monroe snapped. "Because this court does not tolerate arrogance from its officers, nor do we disrespect those who've given more to this country than most of us ever will." And just like that, the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Justice had started to turn. The smirk on Officer Brenner's face faltered, but only slightly. "Your Honor," he said, a bit slower now, "I treat everyone the same." "Doesn't matter if they're a vet or a..." "Enough," Judge Monroe interrupted, her tone sharp. "This isn't about favoritism. It's about respect. And based on your comments, your conduct in this courtroom today borders on contempt. He opened his mouth to respond but thought better of it. The judge turned back to me. Commander Walker, do you mind stating, for the record, your reason for parking in that restricted zone? I stepped up calmly to the mic. Yes, ma'am. I was helping escort a disabled veteran, double amputee, into the federal building. He had a meeting with a benefits officer on the 4th floor. The handicapped spaces were full, so I used a temporary pass issued by the building security office. I handed her a copy of the signed authorization. She examined it. So did the clerk. Well, she said, holding it up for all to see, that's about as legitimate as it gets. The judge looked straight at Officer Brenner. So either you ignored this authorization when issuing the ticket, or you didn't care. Brenner's face was tight now, his jaw set. I didn't see that form at the time. Then maybe you should have asked before launching into your commentary, she said. Because not only was the citation improper, your behavior this morning has been deeply unprofessional. The courtroom was dead quiet. Then came the moment that caught everyone by surprise. Judge Monroe reached for her gavel, paused, and looked directly at Officer Brenner. You came in here today looking to humiliate a man you didn't recognize. You mocked him, dismissed him, and tried to assert authority without facts. This court takes that seriously. She looked at the clerk. Is internal affairs in the building today? The clerk nodded. Good, the judge said, because I'm making a formal referral. And just like that, the balance of power shifted completely. You could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom. Officer Brenner's face drained of color. His hands flexed slightly at his sides like he was trying to contain himself, but the damage had already been done. Judge Monroe continued, her voice level but cutting. This courtroom is not a platform for power trips. It's a place for truth, justice, and respect, for everyone. When a law enforcement officer chooses to act with mockery instead of professionalism, especially towards someone who has sacrificed for this country, it undermines public trust. She turned toward the court officer near the back. Please escort Officer Brenner to the witness room until IA can debrief him. There was a moment of hesitation, but then, like a heavy curtain falling, 2 uniformed deputies stepped forward. Brenner stiffened. You've got to be kidding me. No, Judge Monroe replied without a blink. You're not under arrest. Yet. But your conduct will be reviewed, and if necessary, consequences will follow. You may go. As the officer was led out, the courtroom stirred. Even the folks waiting for unrelated hearings watched in stunned silence. Whispers moved like wind through the benches. A few people nodded quietly. One woman near the back dabbed her eyes with a tissue. The judge turned back to me. Commander Walker, she said, on behalf of this court, I apologize for what you endured here today. You should never have been spoken to that way, not in this room, not in any room. I gave a small nod. I've been through worse, ma'am. But I appreciate it. She offered the smallest smile. I suspect you have. Your citation is dismissed. You are free to go. As I turned to leave, a few people stood. Not all at once. But enough. A quiet kind of salute. One earned, not demanded that I stepped out into the hallway, the echo of the courtroom door clicking shut behind me. The air felt different now, lighter. Not because I'd won anything. But because the truth had stood its ground. My attorney caught up with me. You handled that better than most, he said, shaking his head. Some people would have snapped. I gave a small shrug. You don't get through BUD/S training by reacting to every insult. You wait. You endure. Then you strike, with truth. He nodded, smiling. Well, truth hit hard today. I walked outside into the summer light. The courthouse flag rustled in the breeze. A few folks who had been in the gallery passed me quietly. One man, probably mid-40s, stopped and offered his hand. "My brother served," he said simply. "He would have wanted me to say thank you." I shook his hand. "I'm glad he made it home." "He didn't," the man said, eyes moist. "But thank you anyway." I gave him a solemn nod and let that moment pass between us with the weight it deserved. Some stories don't end with applause or headlines. Just quiet dignity. Later, I'd hear that Officer Brenner received a suspension and was reassigned pending further review. Nothing dramatic, just the slow wheels of accountability finally turning. And me? I went back to my life. Quietly. Just as I had before. But I knew one thing for sure. Sometimes, justice doesn't wear a uniform. Sometimes, it wears a robe, and speaks when it matters most. A week later, I got a letter in the mail, official court stationery, sealed and formal. I opened it slowly, expecting a copy of the dismissal paperwork. But there was more. Inside was a personal note. Handwritten. Commander Walker, I wanted to extend a personal thanks for the dignity and composure you showed in my courtroom. Not every battle is fought with weapons. Some are won with restraint. Justice should never be blind to respect. Judge Ellen Monroe. I sat with the letter for a long time. It wasn't about ego. It never had been. I didn't care about getting the last word or seeing someone punished. I just wanted one thing, to be treated like a human being. Not as a threat. Not as a target. Not as a symbol. Just a man who's given his all and deserves to be seen. The world may not always reward quiet strength. But sometimes, when the right people are watching, it does. And when it does, it's louder than any insult could ever be. The real victory. Knowing you didn't need to raise your voice to be heard. A few days after the hearing, I received a call from someone I didn't expect, Internal Affairs. "Commander Walker," the voice said respectfully, "we'd like to inform you of the results of our preliminary review of Officer Brenner." I didn't say much. I just listened. "He's been placed on administrative leave pending formal disciplinary action," the agent continued. "There were other complaints. Yours wasn't the first. But it was the one that finally broke the silence. That hit me harder than I expected. Other complaints. How many others had he disrespected who didn't have a folder of medals or a judge willing to speak up? I hung up after a brief thank you. But the call stayed with me. This wasn't just about one man and a bad moment. It was about a system where some people believe they can belittle others and never face consequences, until someone stands up. Later that night, I sat in my garage, flipping through an old photo album. Faces of my SEAL team stared back at me. Some living. Some not. They were the real heroes. Not me. But maybe, just maybe, standing up in that courtroom wasn't just about me. Maybe it was for the ones who couldn't anymore. I closed the album. Took a breath. Some fights don't happen on battlefields. They happen in silence. In patience. In a courtroom. And if you carry yourself with honor, sometimes, justice listens. A month later, I found myself back at the courthouse, not as a defendant this time, but as a guest speaker. Judge Monroe had invited me to speak at a community program about integrity in public service. It wasn't something I usually did. I preferred to stay out of the spotlight. But this time felt different. Important. The room was packed, students, law enforcement trainees, even a few officers in uniform. I stood at the podium, gripping the edges, scanning the faces. "You don't need a uniform to show strength," I began. "And you don't need rank to show respect." I spoke about what happened that day in court, but more importantly, what didn't happen. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw punches. I didn't list my medals or demand attention. I just stood my ground. And sometimes, I said, that's enough to shift the entire room. Afterward, a young cadet approached me, probably no older than 20. "Sir," he said, I wasn't sure if this job was for me. But after today, I know the kind of officer I want to be. That landed deep. Because in the end, it wasn't about punishing Brenner. It was about reminding the next generation that power isn't in the badge. It's in how you carry it. And how you treat people when no one's looking. That a few days after the community event, something unexpected happened. I got a letter. No return address. Just my name, written neatly on the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No formal greeting, no signature, just a few lines, handwritten. I was wrong. You didn't deserve that. I let my ego talk louder than my judgment. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just needed you to know I see it now. There was no name, but I didn't need one. It was Officer Brenner. I stared at the letter for a while. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel victory. I felt something closer to closure. It wasn't a public statement. There were no cameras, no press, no performance. Just quiet acknowledgement from a man who, at least for a moment, took responsibility. And sometimes, that's the most justice you can ask for. I folded the note, placed it in a drawer, and moved on with my day. No announcements. No headlines. Just peace. Because when you've fought real battles, you learn the value of silent victories. And this one was exactly that. Months passed. Life settled back into its quiet rhythm. I wasn't chasing recognition, and I certainly wasn't dwelling on the past. But the memory of that courtroom, of the silence after Judge Monroe spoke, of the moment respect replaced ridicule, stayed with me. Then one morning, I received an invitation. It was from the Department of Justice. They were launching a new initiative, training focused on humility, communication, and public service for law enforcement cadets. Judge Monroe was helping shape the program, and she'd asked that I deliver the keynote at its launch. I hesitated at first. I wasn't a public speaker. I was a man who moved in silence, who served in the shadows. But she left a handwritten note with the invitation: they'll listen to you because you didn't speak to be heard. You spoke when it mattered. So I went. Standing before a room full of cadets, I didn't talk about war. I didn't list my medals. I talked about the power of restraint, the strength and respect, and the importance of checking your ego at the door. You may wear a badge, I told them, but the people you serve wear scars you can't always see. Speak carefully. And when you're wrong, own it. That's not weakness. That's the hardest kind of courage. When I finished, the room was silent. Then, slowly, one by one, the cadets stood. Not to applaud. But to honor. Not me. But what justice looks like when it's done right. And as I stepped down from the podium, I realized something: this wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about showing that no one stands above accountability. Not even those with power. Justice didn't roar that day in court. It whispered, and everyone listened.